Hey there, Alex Kidman here with my quick video review of the Motorola Moto G56 5G, another low-cost Moto G phone from Motorola. And look, it's fair to say that the Moto G line has actually delivered some of my favourite budget phones in recent years, but this phone's predecessor, the G55, was not one of them. It was just one of those phones that was a bit awkwardly priced, a little bit average in a few too many areas, so I was really keen to see whether or not the G56 would improve on it. Short answer, unfortunately no, not really. Although it is an improvement over the G55. This is a better phone than G55. If you were looking at the difference between the two, yeah, I'd definitely say get this, but I'd really say get it if you can get it at a discount. Let's get into why that is. So at first glance, the G56 is a definite improvement. What we're looking at here is a 6.7-inch screen, up from the 6.5-inch screen on the G55, although it does have the same 2400 by 1080 resolution, which means technically it's a slightly less sharp screen. Honestly, you're never going to really notice that. Controls sit here on the right-hand side. You've got your standard volume rocker and then a combination power assistant and fingerprint reader button. Works well enough. At the base, USB-C and a headphone jack if you still like rocking it old school with wired headphones. Here in Australia, the Moto G56 5G sells in just two colours, Grey Mist and Black Oyster, and it's the Grey Mist I've got here, although it's got a kind of green-blue thing going on as well. I'm not sure what Pantone, who certify this colour, are kind of on about, although I suppose I probably shouldn't pick a fight with people who do colour as their job every single day. Still, if you're after a purely grey phone, this isn't quite it. Looking around internationally, it appears there are a couple of other colour choices, but the two colour choices is all we get here locally. Now, the back material here, while not specified as vegan leather, and I think my regular viewers will know that I really hate vegan leather, is still kind of soft touch. It still gives me the heebie-jeebies. Thankfully, Motorola does provide a clear plastic case, and look, outside of shooting this video, this thing has lived on the phone the entire time I've tested it. I'm much happier with that smooth feel, but I 100% accept that this is a total personal taste thing. You might prefer the more grippy, textured feel of the back of this thing. I certainly don't. In terms of durability, look, for the longest time, Motorola used to talk about its phones as being water repellent, which, as I've explained in my video about water resistance, doesn't really mean much. I mean, everything but a sponge is water repellent. But it's really pleasing to note that unlike the G55, the G56 is rated as IP69, which means, yeah, you can dunk this thing in water and it should survive. I wouldn't go nuts with it because warranties will only take you so far, but for small-scale accidents, you should be okay. Moving on to the camera, there is an improvement here relative to the G55, although it's mostly at the front. So at the rear, you've got a 50-megapixel wide and 8-megapixel ultra-wide sensor. That's the same megapixel count, although it's slightly tweaked from last year's model. At the front, though, you have a 32-megapixel sensor, which is a nice jump up from last year's selfie shooter. However, this is still a budget camera phone, and you've still got to temper your expectations. The reality here is that if you just want basic, everyday good light photos, pretty much any phone can take those. So yeah, the G56 is fine for your everyday daylight photos. Its portrait shots are acceptable, still has some problems with my bald head, but then lots of phones struggle that way. You don't, of course, get zoom, you just get digital cropped zoom at up to 8 times, and at up to 8 times it does start to struggle, so that's a pretty sensible limitation in there. This is pretty much exactly what you'd expect at this price point and nothing more. And there is an issue here because this isn't one phone in Australia, it's two. There's a $299 model and there's a $399 model, and both of them have the same cameras. I would advise you get the $399 model, except that at near $400, yeah, you can get better cameras than this because you are starting to punch up towards those mid-range shooters where you can start to get some really interesting options, and this is still just kind of average for its price. In terms of internal hardware, the G56 5G is built around a MediaTek Dimensity 76 processor with Android 15. But on the storage and RAM front, as I said, this is two phones. So there's a $299 model being sold through Optus and Vodafone, and that has 4 gig of RAM and 128 gig of storage. Or there's the open market model, which has 8 gig of RAM and 256 gig of storage. But that model, and that is the model that Motorola has loaned me for review, will run you $399, quite a bit more. In terms of straight-line performance, the Dimensity 7060 is an interesting processor. Dimensity processors have actually started to really punch above their weight for a lot of phones, but maybe not so much here. In CPU terms, here's how it compares using Geekbench 6's CPU test against a range of similarly priced phones, or at least similarly priced at the time of making this video. So while that's not a bad result in terms of what you can get for this kind of money, it is kind of notable that it's not really a big punch up from what the G55 was doing a year ago, and that is slightly problematic in terms of getting the most bang for your buck, and especially in what should be a newer and improved phone. And it's actually a story that gets markedly worse if we look at GPU performance, because like the G55, the G56 can't actually handle some of these 3D benchmarks I like to run, so I had to actually drop back to the older Slingshot Extreme test, and here's how it compares just using that test, which is the only one it can run. This is not a powerful phone, and while that's to an extent to be expected given the asking price, the reality is that no matter how much you're spending on a phone, you should try to get the best deal you can, and it's really hard to frame the G56 5G that way. The G56 5G ships with Android 15, but here Motorola's done something that I don't think I've seen any phone maker do before, and it's not something that I like. So if you opt for the 8GB model, which is what I've got here, it comes with 2 Android OS updates and 4 years of security updates, which, while not market leading, is okay at this kind of price. But if you go for the $299 model, so that's just the 4GB model with slightly less storage, that drops down to 1 OS update and 3 years of security updates. And yeah, that's a real choice you've made there, Motorola, and it's not one I support, because I do think people who buy budget phones deserve as many updates as they can manage. And okay, yeah, it's got less RAM, but otherwise, why is it that you're willing to do more updates for the more expensive phone? It just doesn't seem fair to me. Being a Motorola phone, you do get access to Moto Actions, so if I chop the phone twice, it fires up the flashlight, as you can see here. A bit useless in daylight, but it's fun at night. And if I twist it around like it's Chubby Checker, it'll fire up the camera for me. These aren't new features for a Motorola phone, but they're appreciated. They're nice. You get used to having them, and they're quite handy in certain situations. On the battery front, the Moto G56 5G goes a little bit further, because the dead average for phones at this kind of price point, in fact for most Android phones at the moment, is for a 5000 mAh battery, but the G56 5G has a 5200 mAh battery. So a little bit more power in the pack there, although of course it does come down to how you use it. And here I turn to my standard YouTube battery test to see how it compares against its predecessor and, again, those similarly priced phones. Here's how it stacks up. So that's an interesting comparison. 94% is fine for that first hour, because it suggests a phone that should last under moderate use for a full day, maybe a little more. What's pleasing here is the difference between the battery performance in the second and third hours relative to the G55. There's definitely some improvement there, although, again, obviously, it could be better again. The practical side of this is if you want an all-day phone, yeah, this will generally manage that, I think. Motorola's Moto G series phones used to ship with chargers, but those days are behind us, at least here in Australia. Within the box, you'll just find a USB-C to USB-C cable, but nothing else. It will charge at up to 30 watts, though, which is pleasingly quick for a phone at this price point, but you will have to supply your own charger to do that. So should you buy the Motorola Moto G56 5G? Well, look, this is a hard sell to me, I think. Does it improve on the G55, as you'd expect from a newer handset? Well, yeah. Absolutely it does. The battery life is an obvious highlight. The increased durability, another. However, it's not a huge step up in benchmark terms. And while the 8GB phone is the one that I would opt for, because I do think the performance is going to improve a great deal across most apps there, once you get up into that $399 price point, yeah, you do start seeing better, more capable phones, including some discounted mid-range phones that really do mark the G56 5G out as being distinctly more average than I'd like for my money. So basically, at full price, you can do better than the Moto G56 5G right now, but at a discount price, when this thing starts to drop in price, yeah, it'll become significantly better value. So I'd wait for that to happen if you're keen on the G56 5G. Thanks for watching.